go ahead and kick it off, and folks can join in and catch up when they get a chance. So welcome. Thanks everybody for joining today. Glad to have you with us. If you would go to the next slide for us, please, Reed. So if you've not joined the collaborative before, or if you're new, the collaborative was started in 2023, and the idea is to help local governments understand and implement federal funding opportunities. And so obviously federal funding opportunities have shifted quite a bit since we started, but we continue to make sure that everybody understands that obviously electrifying our transportation systems remains a high priority, and our commitment to creating a learning community has not changed. So the collaborative is facilitated by Southern Alliance for Clean Energy and our friends at the Southeast Sustainability Directors Network. And the collaborative convenes events both in person and virtually. We work with local governments, helping connect them to programs and partnership opportunities, building capacity, and providing vetted resources, and also peer-to-peer learning opportunities. And that's really what the secret sauce is with the collaborative. So I'm glad that we've got some local governments joining us today to share about their perspective and experiences. So the collaborative is free to join for anyone who is part of a local government. And we welcome folks from Tennessee, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and Virginia. Staff can join that are from across, different departments and municipal governments, sustainability, fleet, planning, as well as city leadership. So if you are new, welcome. And if you've been with us for a while, thanks for sticking with it. And Reed, if you can go to the next slide, I'm just going to run through today's agenda. So we are going to go through resources quickly, and then really excited to have Sarah Calindo with Cary, North Carolina, talk about their experience with the Volterra electric fire truck. And then we're going to have a conversation on permitting, and we've got Greg and Jacob, and Stan's going to be facilitating that conversation. Thank you guys for being here. And then I'm going to go through a new resource that we have been working on to get some feedback, and then we've got some updates and save the date and wrap up. So that's what we're doing on today's call. Next slide, please. So we've got some virtual meetings. If you could please put on your calendar set for January 29th, 2026, which is so crazy to be saying 2026, and then March 12th as well. And Caitlin, I don't know is there any update that you can provide about Florida, or we're still kind of...
Yeah, I can share a little bit about that. Do you want me to do that now, Dory, or wait till the end?
I guess do now, and then we'll also
Sure.
kind of wrap up at the end too.
That sounds good. Yeah, so for those of you who have been attending our in-person events, we've been trying out a new method of meeting with you all in person this year. We've been doing state-based meetings. We've had some really great meetings with members in South Carolina as well as in Georgia this year, and we are gearing up for our next in-person convening, which will be in Jacksonville, Florida, in February 2026. The date for that is Wednesday, February 4th. And you'll be, if you're a Florida local government, you will be receiving more specific information about that soon.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So we like to make sure that folks know that there are lots of resources at your fingertips with the collaborative. So we have our website with the link there. So it's electrifythesouth.org, and then click on collaborative. There's two sub pages. There's a page that is all of the resources, and there's also a page with the meeting. So if you missed a meeting, you can go back in and watch the video and get yourself caught up. Right now, we have 94 local governments that have participated in the collaborative since the beginning. So there's quite a few of your peers that you can reach out to. We have a collaborative directory that we add folks' names to, name and email address, so that you can reach out to folks that you've heard from, or reach out to folks that you are interested in connecting with about what they're doing with their transportation initiatives. So if you do not want to be part of the directory, then please email me and let me know. Otherwise, we will add your name and email to that, and we always send that out after the meetings. We also have our resource guide that we've been updating after each of our meetings that has all of the things that are discussed at each of the calls categorized by topic. So make sure that you check that out. And then we also have a utility program guide that is a spreadsheet listing with links of all of the utility programs that are offered state by state. So there's tabs for each of the states. So we hope that that is a useful resource to you as well. Let's go on to the next slide. So the theme for today's call is keeping momentum going and planning for the future. So maybe there are not funds in the budget today for a particular initiative, but the team can be assembled, education can be done, buy-in created. And so to that end, we wanted to share some really exciting news from Cary, North Carolina, where they have in place a electric fire truck, pumping truck. And we've asked Sarah Calando, the city's energy manager, to join us today and share the city's experience in terms of getting institutional buy-in for the initial purchase, and then also share how it's going. So now that they've got the asset, what have been their biggest takeaways? So invite Sarah to go ahead and come on and come off mute and
Hey
share.
everyone. Yeah, thank you so much, Dory. Let me share my screen. Bear with me. Uh,
Reed, you may need to stop the share so that she can.
and then bear with me. Oh, no, no. I know how to do this.
It's all good. We can see the slides.
Awesome. There, is it in
There we go.
presentation mode?
Now it's in
Awesome.
presentation mode. Thank you.
Fantastic. You're welcome. Thank you, Dory and ETS, and for having me on the call today. As Dory mentioned, my name is Sarah Caliendo, Cary's energy manager, and I'm excited to share a little bit about our experience in acquiring, purchasing, and implementing the Pierce Volterra electric pumper. That's the technical term. It's also an engine. And I'll go through a little bit about um, our environmental goals, our baseline of our why we went through with the purchase of the Volterra, and some of our environmental goals across the town and our initiatives. I'll do a high level overview of our purchase process. That includes our partnerships with our dealer and the manufacturer of the truck, how we planned for implementation at our Fire Station 9, not only at the fire station, but with our fire staff and across our town manager's office and throughout our town staff overall, as well as our community, and helping them understand the benefits that this truck provides, as well as the actual implementation and getting that feedback from our fire staff. It's actually been an incredible journey, hearing what sentiments were with our fire staff before receiving the truck, and then hearing their sentiments after. It's actually pretty incredible, just to the things that we learned that they experienced. So on a high level, Cary has our Imagine Cary community plan. We did an update in 2024 that includes an enriched chapter, and that highlights Cary's environmental initiatives and our goals to 2040. So some of those greenhouse gas emission reduction targets are highlighted at our root, which is our Imagine Cary community plan. In over the course of 2 years, we through community outreach and partnerships with regional partners, staff, and our community. We developed Carrie's sustainability and climate action strategies. These are our stewardship strategies for a sustainable future. And they highlight 6 focus areas of sustainability in everyday lives. And one of those is transportation and mobility. But I also want to add in energy because that's what the Volterra kind of straddles the line of, both obviously transportation and mobility. This is moving our fire staff to emergency response scenes, as well as its energy benefits that it has on the vehicle. We have additionally to the sustainability and climate action strategy that kind of developed out of the work that had been done previously with our strategic energy action plan that was developed in 2012, and then it was updated in 2015. So the climate strategy, for short, updates those municipal goals and targets for reducing not only municipal carbon metrics and greenhouse gas emissions, but also broadening that out to our community. How can our community be a part of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions throughout all of Cary? To continue on, I wanted to highlight some of the process of how we got here to acquiring and implementing the Pierce Volterra. We completed early research, and I also want to say that we had a long-term partnership with Pierce. Pierce is the manufacturer of all of our fire apparatuses for the town, and kind of like a Leaf is to Honda, we have a good partnership with our dealer, Atlantic. And we did some early research along with Atlantic and Pierce to learn more about the Volterra. What have other communities experienced with this vehicle on the scene in different climate zones? For example, this vehicle has been implemented in Oregon and in Portland specifically, so we know that it can handle hilly terrain, I guess you could say, hilly roads, tight turns, as well as cooler climates. This has been implemented in parts of Wisconsin, and that's where these trucks are made, in Appleton, Wisconsin. So having that experience of learning their experience in the colder climates gave us a level of confidence. Okay, this has been tried and shored up. So we made that connection. I'll dig into this in a little bit, but we had already kind of gone all in on idle reduction technology, IRT, for our fire fleet. So we initiated that by doing retrofits of our existing fire fleet, as well as any new conventionally fueled diesel vehicles for fire, that those would also contain IRT, which we value as a stepping stone and as a measure to help us reduce those emissions while idling. In March 23 to October, we started working up those conceptual designs. At that point, we had already provided some of the work from our fire staff on getting those specifications over to Pierce. So during 22 to 23, it takes about a year's process for our fire staff to go through what essentially is a giant book of specifications and products to select for all fire trucks, ladder trucks, engines, you name it. They have everything is selected to meet our fire staff specifications. And a bonus of the Volterra is that it plugs and plays very well with what our existing fire fleet is and meeting those specifications. So additionally, we looked at, okay, well, what does this battery that's attached, that's part of the construction, how do we want the design to look? What are what are those changes between our conventional truck and the Volterra? And really, there's not much difference. That was another benefit for us in terms of going through with the Volterra too. The only major difference is that the cab is just a little bit shorter. I got to sit in the back. I think some folks on the call might have been here when we had SSD in person last month, and it's a little snug, but it's still pretty roomy. And when you think of all the heavy equipment and clothing that fire staff are wearing. So fast forward, they Voltaire Pierce did all the work in constructing the vehicle, and then by April we received the Volterra. But though it was delivered in April, we went through rounds of training with all of the fire staff shifts. So there's 3 shifts that work at our fire stations. And so this one we already knew was going to be stationed at Fire Station 9, and we ensured that folks on staff were well equipped, had questions answered, and felt ready to go when June happened, so that we can implement this vehicle. There again, what's not added into this timeline is shoring up Fire Station 9 for it to be ready for charging the vehicle. That was a requirement of Pierce. In order to have this vehicle delivered, we did need to have a DC fast charger installed in the fire station. So we, as a town and as staff, in partnership with our fleet manager and public works, with our fire, we determined that we were going to have the charger installed in the ceiling of the bay. So it's out of the way, and we have a drop cord for easy accessibility for charging. Now, it did require some modifications to the electrical power that was already at the site. So that was what I'll share at the end is a lesson learned. So we did need to upgrade our transformer to handle the charger. So when it was all said and done, we opted for a company that has a presence in Cary. So we opted for ABB, their DC fast charger that's rated at 150 kilowatts. And it has proven to be accessible and out of the way for fire staff and provide the power needed to charge the vehicle within 15-20 minutes to full charge. A little bit of the idle reduction technology. This is pulled from our website just to learn some more. We, when purchasing other vehicles for fire, we have, I think, at least one or two that we've already ordered, but they're spaced out to be delivered in a year or 2 or 3. That they will have the IRT built in, and we still value the savings that we receive from it. Cost was another factor in purchasing the Volterra. This was something that we wanted to get ahead of as a town, and making sure that our council was well equipped and that our community was well informed of what are the costs of a fire apparatus in today's dollars. And as you can see, they are costly. And this isn't even showing what the cost of a vehicle is in today's dollars that won't get delivered for another 4, maybe even 5 years. So the timeline to delivery on a conventional diesel truck through Pierce has increased. And I can't speak for other manufacturers, but that's how it is with Pierce. And blame it on whatever you'd like. It's just the nature of today. But as you can see, we ordered a diesel powered pumper back in 2023, and that's still not to be expected for delivery until next year. Same goes for a ladder truck. Ladder trucks are your larger trucks with a rear driver in the back. So as a front driver and a rear drive steering person in the back steering as well. That's not expected for delivery until 2027. So when we were going to order a vehicle in 2024, we knew we either would get a vehicle that wouldn't be delivered until 2028. And we were approached by Pierce with the opportunity to purchase the Volterra, and they had it at a quicker turnaround time. It was about $1 million more than the conventional pumper, so that was a consideration. But when everything was said and done, we had a faster turnaround, and we are projecting with maintenance costs and use costs that we would see a return on the investment in a reasonable amount of time. And because we tend to keep these vehicles in service about 15, 20 years, and then they start tearing down in levels of service. And our fire staff, I can get, if anyone has questions around this, I can definitely reach out to our fire staff. They are the experts fully on their process. But I wanted to be transparent in showing this, and this is on our website too to learn more, because this is a critical factor in terms of making the purchases of these medium to heavy duty vehicles. You may be asking and thinking about, well, what are today's costs of the Volterra? And my understanding, it's about $3.5 million, give or take. So it has increased in cost by a lot, and about double. And verdict's still out on what that would look like for carry. I would guesstimate to say that based on our mission and goals and targets that we have that we're committed to, it would still be on the table for discussion. So I wanted to highlight too that I did share a little bit of implementation, but we received the vehicle in April. It was put into service in June, and it's the feedback that we received from our fire staff has actually been pretty incredible to hear. I haven't heard any major challenges that they've experienced. I think everything's been very smooth for them in terms of putting it to use and seeing it on the scene. Again, the Volterra has a dual powertrain. So it has a fully electric engine, and then it has a fully diesel engine. So I wouldn't call it a hybrid, but it does have two specific engines that it can operate, and you can manually switch it from electric to diesel. They had a call that this vehicle was put on a call back in June, and they arrived to the scene. I believe it was like around 87% battery life. It drove an electric. It was on the scene for 3 hours, pumping water in electric mode for 3 hours, and made it back to the station. Its home base, again, is Fire Station 9, with about 40% battery remaining. And staff was able to get off the vehicle, decontaminate, shower, and everything. By the time they got back down to the Volterra, it was about 15 minutes or so, and it was back up to 90% charge. So it does charge at a quick rate. And so that was nice to see that it actually is charging at a rate that around about what they had promised. Other implementation lessons learned is that, and this is also feedback that we received from our fire staff too, that, and these are some things that us in town hall that don't utilize the vehicle on a day-to-day basis, it's not our role. We wouldn't have thought of the tertiary benefits that the Volterra would provide. one of those is being sound. A diesel engine, when it's operating, when you're around a diesel engine, it's quite loud, and it runs at about 100 decibels. In electric mode, it drops down to about 80 decibels, and that may not sound like a lot, but the staff on all the shifts said that they could easily communicate in the cab without their headset. When I think of them being on a scene that's very high stress, and demanding of all their, faculties, they have to be aware of commands that are being given by their lead, knowing where victims are. It's a very high stress situation. And to have one less layer of stress on them, being a blaring diesel engine, to overcome that, actually was a really interesting benefit that they shared. Um, Obviously, the emissions, not only is hearing loss over time with career fire staff and a concern, a legitimate thing that occurs in the industry. So is being around emissions on a regular basis. So when it's operating in electric mode, there are no diesel emissions being emitted. So that's also a benefit. And then another one that we didn't even consider was the comfort inside the cab for the staff. So that was another bonus for them for after fighting a scene. It's hot, it's stressful. They are able to come back to a very comfortable cab with, layers of heavy jackets and all of that they are able to be comfortable, is additive to their physical and mental health. And I think those are factors that aren't considered in the space that these folks get to work in, day in and day out. So that was probably, out of everything, the largest benefit that I think could be shared with other communities and taken to other fire departments as they consider their next fire truck purchase. Before I wrap up with questions, this is a photo of the group that came out that last month, with Secretary Reed Wilson from NCDEQ, and that's our fire chief, Chief Cooper, second to last, and then at the last, that's Assistant Chief Chris Parker. They really are the experts, but to hear those guys share their feedback, their experience, and to share from their staff's experience, it's incredible to hear, and also to see folks change their opinion of electrification, electric vehicles. It's very much I'll say it's very much a blue collar job. And it's a very, like, your heart is in it. The folks that work in our fire department, their heart is in the work they do and the service they provide to our community, and fully appreciate the work they do day in and day out. And when I'm sure that there was some questions like, really, an electric fire truck? We were able to, say, yeah, we're going to do this. Guess what? It has redundant energy source on there. That's a level of resiliency that we'd love to see, for not just their ability to go out to more calls. They have that ability if needed, with having that diesel backup, but also it's a benefit to our community that they're out there. I think that also gives them a little level of assurance to say, hey, okay, this actually does work. When they finally are able to, feel it, experience it, ride in the vehicle, drive the vehicle, the sentiments start turning and start changing, and it was a really neat experience just to hear folks' feedback that may have had some hesitations or hesitations, I think, would probably be a best word for that. And to see them come around and say, yeah, I really like it, and have that sense of pride too, that they get to work at Fire Station 9 on that fire truck. So I would say, lastly, before I, open it up to any questions that any folks may have, I think one of the lessons learned was that Fire Station 9 is a newer facility for Cary. It's one of our newer fire stations. And we did not plan for either solar in mind or with EV charging in mind. And so that was an added cost that we had to implement after the fact in order to receive this vehicle. So I think for communities that may be wanting to explore a heavy duty electric vehicle, or even a dual fuel vehicle, that's one to consider is what are the implications of getting this building or site ready for that. So I would say designing with solar and EV in mind, having that infrastructure in place is one less thing to think about at the end of the day. And having conversations about what are our goals as a community and as a municipality? And are we sticking with those goals? And is this an opportunity to inch a little closer to achieving lower greenhouse gas emissions in our operations? Is this an opportunity to add resiliency in the services and operations that we provide to our community? I think that's one to really consider. And I hope that we can be a community that fire departments can come to just see and experience what we've experienced with the vehicle. We've had several local governments come by and work, their fire staff work with our fire staff and exploring that. And I think that's, I know I feel confident in speaking for Chief Cooper and Chief Parker that they're like, anytime you want to come on, just give us a call. They're really great guys, really great folks over there, and always happy to share what they've learned and experienced with others. So yeah, I think, and then also the financial impact is not one to ignore. It is costly. And then with the reduced incentives that are available and tax credits that are available, I will say, I'll be honest, I missed out on the federal incentive for the medium heavy duty fleet incentive. However, I'm have submitted everything to Duke for the prep credit. So knowing that some of those credits are gone, or and that some are still available with the local utility for infrastructure, is one to keep an eye out. Being aware of what funding may be available to help support this, especially in this time. But in our capital planning, having those conversations when we're going through the budgets, because for us, this budget is coming out of capital and it's allocated to our fire department. And so if it's something that can be worked out, understanding, well, what are we going to be saving in terms of gallons in operation? You're projecting, I believe it was about 5,000 gallons of diesel, I believe that we're saving. The verdict's still out on some actual numbers because the vehicle, though it's in service, it hasn't been consistently in service because everyone wants to check it out and we're willing to share it. So I'm happy to report on what our electrical consumption has been with the vehicle as it's being more consistently used. I need a solid month or two's worth of data, but yeah, we're really excited about seeing what those savings might look like. But yeah, those are some considerations for other communities. But thanks for giving Cary the opportunity to share our experience, and I'm happy to answer or try to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was really informative. And it's great to hear that your fire department would like to be a resource and share too. So, if there is interest for other local governments to hear directly from Cary Fire Department, might be a good idea to try to put together a webinar if it's too far, obviously. So, this collaborative goes all across the Southeast. So hopping over to Cary might not be an option, but maybe virtually. So, folks consider that. Does anybody have any questions for Sarah? You can come off mute and ask them.
Hi, this is Elaine in Hollywood.
Hi, Elaine.
Hi. Just a quick clarification. The 5,000 gallons of diesel, what's the time frame on that? Is it month, year? What are we talking about? 5,000
I think it
gallons.
was a year. I'm
Okay,
sorry, that was a year.
that's it. Okay, thank
Hmm.
you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Hey, Greg.
Hey Sarah, for the DC fast charger, do you have when you did the transformer upgrade, did that all get put on a separate meter?
Yes,
And then what does like the bill look like for that?
that's a great question. I'd have to get back to you on that one.
Okay, all right, I'll check
Yeah,
in. Thanks.
yeah. Our Dooku accounts are very not fully organized yet.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah. I'm getting there, baby steps. Yeah, but I'm happy to follow up with these questions. So thank you both. Thanks, Greg.
Go ahead, Ray.
I have a question, it's probably a European question. I know in Europe they're trying to do smaller fire trucks to fit on a narrow streets and on so you don't have to have like, basically designing for safer streets. And
Mhm.
so I don't know if there's any if you or other cities in the US are trying to have shorter fire trucks that can fit down alleys and basically basically allow if we don't have to have wide streets.
I know our fire department is considering what street designs are currently with the fire department that serves that portion of the community. So, from my understanding, Fire Station 9 serves parts of downtown Cary, which is very narrow and tight turns. So, having a vehicle that can do tight turn radius, or tight radius turns, yeah, um, that was one of the benefits of the Volterra. Having like a ladder truck with that, which are the longer vehicles with the aerial ladder, um, those have the rear driver so that they can help make those tighter turns. So I know for us, we are considering what the station, what part of the community that station is serving, um, in terms of their next purchase.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to have to wrap this up so that we can get to the other conversations. But thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing and for being a resource. And can't wait to hear more as the project evolves. All
Thank you,
right.
Dory.
Thank you. So our next conversation is with Greg Spoonseller at Holly Springs, North Carolina, and Jacob Bolin with Advanced Energy. So as I mentioned earlier, we're wanting to keep the momentum going and planning for the future. So now's the time to be kind of like looking and reviewing policies and procedures and recommendations. So I'm gonna hand it over to my colleague Stan to talk through this and to facilitate this conversation on permitting. Thank you guys so much for being here today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Dory, and thank you, Greg and Jacob, for your time today. So we're gonna talk a little bit about the City of Raleigh's EV Ready Playbook as an example of efforts to address some of the barriers to installing charging infrastructure at scale, whether that's for, city needs or for community needs. And we don't have Megan Anderson with us today because she is out of the office, sustainability director over at Raleigh. But we do have Greg and Jacob, and Jacob at Advanced Energy helped lead um, the effort on this Raleigh playbook. And so we're going to kind of hear from Jacob a little bit about sort of a high level origin story of how this came to be. And then Greg was with the city of Raleigh at the time, and so he'll be able to share a little bit about what was going on from the municipal perspective and kind of talk about some of the takeaways from the effort and what he's continuing to bring forward with his work in Holly Springs. And I just want to say at the top of the conversation that, we've been having a robust dialogue over the last couple of years here at the Collaborative and in other spaces about the need to figure out how to make the installation of charging infrastructure simpler, right? We all recognize that it's a complex endeavor that involves issues ranging from, vendor relationships to permitting to utility interconnection. And so today we're going to sort of narrow the focus in a little bit on permitting as one of the challenges to scaling infrastructure that is in the purview of the city to kind of think through and think about ways in which permitting might be done a little bit differently in the future. Recognizing that the pace of charging infrastructure that we've seen historically is picking up and likely going to pick up more quickly, both in terms of the number of chargers needed and the private sector's ability to sort of meet that need, which has certainly expanded over the years, but also the amount of charging at a particular location and what that means for site planning and permitting as well. So with that, let's dive into the conversation and Jacob, thanks again for being here today and given kind of Advanced Energy's role in kind of helping facilitate along with the city of Raleigh this playbook. Can you kind of tell us at a high level kind of how did this come to be? How did this playbook go from kind of a concept to a tool the city's able to use and other cities are able to use to help expedite infrastructure deployment?
Cool. Yeah, we'll Stan, Dory, thanks for the invite. I knew we were following up on the electric fire truck, but I'm just sorry to everyone that we've got to pivot from a very cool electric fire truck deployment to permitting. So I
I don't
guess
know. Well, I will say the charging station for that fire truck sounded pretty cool too.
Facts. Yeah, we got to get a picture from Sarah on that. So yeah, I mean, I think Stan, really to kind of open things up, a lot of this was really driven by Greg's initiative. Greg reached out. I think the report was published. I forget what the exact date was, but it was published in 2022. And Greg reached out a bit before that, and basically, was like, "Hey, we want to have something that's comprehensive." Advanced Energy, we work with electric utilities and other partners across the state to try to help progress some of these advanced and clean energy technologies. So we, through the Plug and C platform, which of course very well as a founding member, still sits on our steering committee for Plug and C. We really wanted to kind of just help bridge the outreach and education 101 with some of the really kind of like technical nuts and bolts for how does this go. And so I think that we're always happy to try to distribute information to the general public or to other stakeholders, but I think it really took the leadership and initiative from Greg and the team at the city of Raleigh to say, let's blend that outreach and education, like that information, with what our like processes should be, and making sure we really wrangle all of not just like what are those processes, but who are the different stakeholders internal to the city of Raleigh or internal to the local government that are essential for making sure that we can connect the dots. So just, yeah, I really want to give a lot of credit to Greg for initiating a lot of this.
You're on mute, Stan.
Thank you. With that credit, Greg, let's bring you into the conversation. And when you reached out to Jacob, to get this done, I think what's timely about this conversation, right, is that we're in a moment where we're all trying to figure out the pivot of how to go from a time when there was a lot of funding available and a sense of urgency that funding was creating to a time when that funding has become more challenging to access, and how we might be able to use this moment to think creatively about planning to be able to position ourselves to move quickly when things change again. And so what did you see, in terms of the genesis of this project from within Raleigh? How did you all go from concept to playbook?
Yeah, so the sort of the project started this is back in like 2017, 2018, and we're thinking about transportation electrification because that's, of course, one of the things that we think about as sustainability people. And we knew that like we had Volkswagen settlement funding that was going to be showing up, and in North Carolina, Governor Cooper had signed Executive Order 80, and it called for the public adoption of electric vehicles, and it set some targets for what we were going to see for electric vehicles on the road in North Carolina. And we were trying to figure out like how can we get ourselves in a better position to take advantage of all of these funds and get more in line with what the state wants to do and try to serve as a leader in this space. And so some of it was like, oh, there's going to be money for charging stations. Like we need to figure out where to put them. And that was like the first part. But then it sort of ballooned into this much bigger conversation that Stan was intimately a part of for the city, where we conducted this transportation electrification study. And that focused not only on like our fleet vehicles and what we want to do with public charging, but it focused on equitable economic development. It focused on access, and it came up with like 3 or 4 dozen different actions and strategies that the city could take in partnership with many others to address some of these things that we want to be paying attention to. So now it's like, well, part of that study is like, oh, figure out where you want to put the charging stations, but also, provide education and outreach to businesses, to residents, so that way their adoption of electric vehicles can be a lot easier. So once we had that study, it's like very clearly in the actions that, it's like 4 or 5 of them are all about communicating this information publicly, trying to streamline permitting processes, the usual stuff that we have come to kind of take for granted now, like, oh, of course that's what we're supposed to do. But we didn't have like a clear place for all of this stuff to live. And even for me, I was thinking like, well, if I purchased an electric vehicle, how do I install a charging station? Or I put myself in, a commercial property owner's shoes, and it's like, well, what do I do? And we tried to figure all of that stuff out and unpack those processes, kind of like process engineer what it would look like to go from ideation to installation and execution or commissioning of a charging station at that point. And as Jacob and I, we were talking about like what might this look like, and like, do we have these resources that are out there today? A lot of the resources were kind of out there today. However, they weren't compiled into one location. And it wasn't like, it was kind of high level. It's like, oh, decide what kind of charging station you want to install, and then call an electrician. Make sure you check with your utility. And it's like, that's great. But we as we're talking about this, it's like, well, what are like the questions that my mom is going to ask if she was going to install a charging station at her house? Because she's like, she doesn't know anything about electrical. She doesn't know anything about charging infrastructure. She doesn't know the plug types and the ports and how long it's going to take. So we tried to give all of that information without being like the preachy, like rah electric vehicles sustainability stuff. We sort of took that as I don't need to convince you that you need to buy an electric vehicle with this, but like, this is the next step for you once you figure out that this is going to be a good choice. And we looked at from a residential perspective, we looked at it from a commercial, from a retrofit perspective, what all of this would take, and then what sort of failure points you could expect. Tried to add in a lot of like the lessons learned, and then also like go through the actual permitting process. Like what information am I going to need to submit? What am I going to need to consider? And have that stuff laid out for anybody to be able to figure it out. So it's like the step by step, like these are all the things you should consider as you're going through the process, and then make it really easy. So that way you don't have to be a general contractor or an electrician to be able to fill this stuff out.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I mean, putting on my hat as somebody who used to run an EV infrastructure company, the lack of clarity about permitting is a real challenge when you're trying to deploy at scale across, a wide geography, and every single jurisdiction is different. And when it's not easy to figure out what you need to do in a particular jurisdiction, that can be a real hang up. And certainly, conversely, where things are laid out and where there is clarity, a company's business development efforts are going to gravitate there, right? Because it's going to be easier and less costly for a business to install where there's that kind of clarity. So I think it's really important, just to hit on that mark, just how important that clarity can be. I'm curious, Greg, like now that you kind of look back at the effort, and now that you sort of transitioned your role, to Holly Springs, what do you see as being kind of most valuable from that playbook effort? And Jacob, I'll ask you the same question from a non-governmental perspective, but what do you think was most valuable, Greg?
I think it's unpacking the entire process and sort of understanding that things happen differently on like the case by case basis. However, A lot of people haven't thought very deliberately about this within, your own local governments, and sometimes it's sort of like on the whims of your chief building officer on terms like what the ADA requirements can be and some of those things, because we don't have a lot of very, very clear guidance. So some of the things that I'd gone through with Jacob is like, what exactly does this look like? And so we're trying to interpret some of these things that are ebbing and flowing and changing. But for me, it's like the act of going through it and trying to figure out all of those details as you're going through like an installation have been really valuable to me, especially in Holly Springs. We were part of the Charging Smart cohort, and one of the required indicators that for that designation program, which is similar to like Soul Smart but for transportation electrification, is streamline your permitting process, get a permitting checklist together. And one of the things that I did was in Holly Springs, I went through like my pretend portal. So I go into the portal and I put in this pretend project, and I'm trying to figure out all of the different fields that I've got to add information in. And it's like, what are those? How would I, have that information so that way it's all spelled out for somebody who wants to come in behind me and add that stuff in. And honestly, that saves my permitting department a lot of headaches. So that way they don't have incomplete permits that are submitted. We don't have to go back and forth with the contractor or whoever's submitting that stuff. It's all laid out, and it should be a lot easier for them. So I think that's it. But the other big thing is like, what is the role of a local government in providing public charging? And that's a question that we didn't really ask ourselves at the beginning of this sort of process. Is like, would the local government trying to take on the task of providing public charging for residents and visitors, how does that disincentivize the private sector from doing this stuff? And what does it look like for multi-unit dwellings? What does it look like for these commercial properties, workplace charging, for fleet charging? And I think for me, I kind of understand all of those different perspectives now, and it allows me to communicate with our economic development department, with our planning department, and then with a lot of other community stakeholders like schools and businesses on why and how they can go about implementing charging, and what those benefits are.
Yeah, it's really good for you to hear you make that point, that the sort of often I think we think about making the installation of charging infrastructure easier as being something that you're doing for the installer. But to hear you speak about the efficiencies that are brought into the local government when, that's clear, that there's clarity and there's certainty for that private sector, is really a good point, I think, for folks to take home. And Jacob, from your perspective, kind of outside of the government and having, worked on this playbook, kind of what are some of the values you're seeing beyond just to the city of Raleigh or what Greg's able to take forward to Holly Springs?
Yeah, I think in some cases it's the hope that when you've done something in the past, you don't have to start from scratch again, right? So like the ability to kind of start pulling information together, and you always need to kind of like refresh it. And as I'm looking at this, there's probably quite a bit that if Greg and I were to undertake this project again, it would be like, I'd be curious to see how we would edit that and make revisions that are kind of like have us prepared for the next 5 years. I think the biggest thing for me though, Stan, is making sure, like from a stakeholder perspective that's doing outreach and educate, technical outreach and education, is kind of like making sure our resources are actually doing a job. I think that sometimes it's like really easy to get caught up in like, oh, there's all this good information, we really want to share that. And I think that is important, like general education is still needed. But I think now there's an opportunity, like when we started this, to Greg's point, there was not the level of private sector charger deployment or OEM engagement that we have now. I mean, just what we've seen over the last 4 years in terms of that market evolution has been so impactful that I think for us, it's really not about like, oh, sorry, the lights in the office just went out. So basically it's like, we're settling in here. So basically just like making sure that it's not just about like, oh, here's some information for your benefit. Like we didn't spend a lot of time on like, here's the market of EVs in North Carolina and why that matters. But instead we tried to find like, what are those pain points for, to Greg's point, somebody actually walking through like the permit application window. How do we make sure that we actually have like the text boxes in the right places, or that we know who the person is at the city of Raleigh that's like actually going to be receiving this form, and make sure that we're connected with them to make sure that we're designing on the front end information that is like how they need it. So I think for us, it's just that question of like making sure that the resource is solving a very specific problem, and just trying to basically, really beat that problem to death in terms of like going through the process and the procedure that, that we're hoping that it delivers.
That's
So,
great.
Stan, I do want to say, I think we did kind of beat it to death too. I mean, like, because I think we went into a lot of painstaking detail for like what it looks like to install this charging infrastructure. And when I think about like the amount of emails and questions that would get funneled into my inbox from people like, what does it look like to do this? And then after we had this playbook, and I can just sort of like hit the button to send it to them and say page 26, and like then those slowed down. So again, it took a lot of, and added some capacity to me, because we had this immediate resource that could be referenced, and then a lot of other people were aware that it existed, so then they started sharing it out, and it became a tool for them to use too. Now, I'll say we did take a lot of information from all of that stuff that existed in the ether and compiled it together. The city of Orlando had done something pretty similar that was really good for them. We wanted something like that too. And to Jacob's credit, when we first approached designing this, we felt like we steal everybody else's stuff, and like in Holly Springs, I take Sarah's stuff, and I take Michelle's stuff, and like I'm using all of that because I'm not trying to recreate the wheel. So one of the things that we wanted to do was, while the permitting process is going to be specific to Raleigh, we wanted it to be applicable to anybody in North Carolina, in a Duke territory, because it was going to be pretty similar, and then that saved them the headache of trying to create something. So we think that not only is it good for the local governments, but it was good for the utility too.
Yeah, good point. Good point. And let me just, folks who are here on the webinar, does anybody have any questions at this point for Jacob or Greg? If you do, feel free to come off mute and ask the question.
So I will also mention, I did drop the playbook in the chat, as well as the city's transportation electrification study. Would encourage everyone to take a peek at those if you haven't already seen them.
Yeah, and I'll add that, when we think about the work that you laid out, Greg, kind of getting to the playbook, I just want to also emphasize that when we worked on the initial transportation electrification study, we were really intentional about bringing in all the different departments that touch electric transportation to be part of that study. You'll remember we sat down with the finance department, the budget department, the fleet, the motor pool, we sat down with everybody to try and use that as an opportunity to do some internal education, as well as, kind of create a roadmap for what the city might do. And so I think there's always that opportunity with these efforts to kind of move the internal process along, as well as kind of meet, what's coming at you from the market. I just want to kind of wrap up the conversation by kind of looking forward a little bit and kind of getting to that market that, as Jacob pointed out, has changed and is rapidly evolving as we speak. And, we're seeing charging infrastructure becoming, in some ways, more complex, not simpler, right? We now have solutions that are being installed for curbside charging. We have big efforts in places like New York City and others to install curbside charging, which has a whole other host of opportunities and challenges. We've got the need in multifamily housing, especially workforce and affordable housing, for infrastructure to really unlock ownership of EVs, particularly as that used market comes on board and affordable EVs are ready today. And then we had that continuing push for public charging, but now in a new context where 5 years ago there weren't a lot of companies that were profitable at installing and owning and operating infrastructure. Today, we're seeing rapid growth and a lot of companies now kind of getting to that point, in part because there's enough EVs to bring revenue into the system where they're able to where a city could confidently work with them and believe that they're going to be around for a while, and able to do the job. So, in that kind of evolving context of sort of new use cases, new priorities, a different infrastructure market, what are some of the things you all are thinking about when you're thinking about how to continue to evolve an effective and efficient process for local governments to support infrastructure deployment?
That's a good question, Stan. I think it's just it's like more and faster is what we kind of need to be doing. For me, within the last like 6 weeks, I've got 6 charging infrastructure projects on my plate. One of them, interestingly, is with a new microtransit service that we're going to be offering town residents. So this model exists in other places, but it's kind of like an on-demand Uber-ish type thing for residents. And happy to report that they're going to be using some of the Volkswagen electric buses, and we need to provide them charging infrastructure for that. So I think it's just sort of like a more and faster, and if we can come up with some like very boilerplate type projects and project examples for for more similar use cases where we're seeing the most, and even streamline some of like the design work potentially for them, where it's like, this is how we're going to do like a meter combo panel, and like this is what you should expect, and have some of those kind of like template type projects ready to go for people that adhere to our UDO. And we've got EVSE installed and EV ready requirements in our UDO. And for our permitting group, they see some of these things come in and they still kind of scratch their heads. It's like, is this exactly what we expected? And potentially revisiting that to make sure that it's serving in the spirit of what our UDO says. But I think allowing people to get this stuff done faster, because it's not as complicated as it was 10 years ago, and being able to provide them with a more streamlined type of like project process, like make sure that these are your primary checkpoints with your utility, and have some resources available for that, so that way they can just get it done quicker.
Great. Any thoughts on that question, Jacob?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think everything that Greg said is great, and I think just building on that is just the reminder that it's never going to be perfect. Like, I think it's so easy to really focus on creating the plan that just, if we just have the right information in the playbook, then everything's going to be solved. But until that point, we can't deploy. I think that like we really try to stress like smart and informed deployment, but where you're prototyping, where this is an iterative process where, you will learn so much more about the infrastructure deployment equipment standards that you might prefer, or, the manufacturers and networking that you might prefer if you have something to compare it to. And so I think instead of really focusing on making sure that like by 2050, we're going to have kind of these long-term goals. Obviously, the strategic vision is very important, but the ability to just more quickly iterate so that you can gain information, like that iterative process really informs so much more than anything that a plan will tell us. And so I think that's a big thing. The other thing I would just really mention, like this is getting a little bit more technical, but where possible, to really focus on what it means for equipment to be interoperable, so that you're not as tied to specific hardware or networking considerations, where you do, like, again, in the spirit of interoperability, the ability to switch out a hardware manufacturer or a station if you want to, because once the circuits are in place and once things are set up, then it's going to be a bit easier to just We don't really want to be like ripping and replacing all the time. We want equipment to be reliable, but should you need to do that, it's much easier to just drop another level 2 station there instead of, having to really go back to the drawing board of like, do we feel good about the providers that we're really working the most closely with? And so I think whatever opportunity you have to standardize your equipment within a framework of interoperability and reliable prototyping to whatever degree that's possible or realistic.
Great.
Stan, can I add one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead. One more
Yeah,
minute.
so I wanted to mention that we really pushed like future proofing in the handbook, and it's like if you're going to be building, it costs 4 to 6 times less to do it now than it will later, and like I felt like we were really pushing that message, and then I got a ton of charging infrastructure projects that had to be retrofits, and I just want to cry because like we could have done it so much cheaper and we could have executed it so much more quickly had we planned ahead. And so I think that one of the things that we really have to emphasize is like, while it might not be there today for you, when the demand is there, like you can just make it so much easier on yourself if you can do it right at that design point. And I think like I could scream it 2 or 3 times louder and it still wouldn't be loud enough. So just that's something I really want to emphasize with all of you communicating with not only your internal people but external stakeholders too.
Well, I really appreciate that insight, Greg, and yours as well, Jacob. I think it's really exciting just to kind of be hearing where the state of the conversation is today. And I think for our, in an upcoming webinar, Greg, we're going to have to get your mom on so we can make sure that she can, confirm that you in fact did deliver on her as well.
That'd be wild.
Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Dory. Thank you very much, Jacob and Greg, and have a good rest of your day.
All right. Well, thank you, Greg and Jacob and Stan, for that conversation. I did want to also just say if your local government has a resource similar to what they developed in Raleigh or a different version of it, please put it in the chat. We like to make sure that we're aware of what everybody's got going on and be able to share those resources with the group. All right. So switching gears a little bit now, but keeping kind of with the theme today of planning ahead and knowing that we want to keep the momentum going and planning for the future, and maybe not having the funds right now to do what it is exactly that you would like to do, but knowing that now is the time to plan. We wanted to have a conversation about a resource that we have started developing. And the idea is that it would be a kind of strategic framework for municipal fleet electrification. And it can be used to evaluate kind of where you are and what's needed in your local government to keep that push going with fleet electrification wherever you are in the process. So I mean, obviously, when we're looking at transitioning the fleet, it is overwhelming and it is extremely time consuming. So what we're wanting and what we're proposing creating would be a questionnaire. So it would be a series of questions that you would go through and answer yes or no, or I don't know. And then it would kind of generate a roadmap of where you are, where you would need to start, and then help identify questions that you need to get answers to that would create that framework for your municipality. And it would also have resources for each of the steps. So, for example, you're sitting behind your desk and you're trying to figure out this complex thing. To be able to go to a yes or no questionnaire and then get a short list of resources and kind of a visual pathway to success. And ideally, it would reduce some of the steps based on your unique inputs and then create kind of a customized approach. Additionally, we would want to include in the resources municipalities that have already gone through or completed a particular step and can be a peer resource. So like they've already gone through it. These are the things that worked well for them. These are the things that they would do differently. So, so before I go any further, I do definitely want to thank some of the local governments that I've reached out to that have already kind of got quite a few electric vehicles in their fleet and have gone through this without a roadmap and just kind of did it through, you know, decisions and learning and relearning and making some mistakes and thinking through multiple times the best way to approach something. So Matt Anderson with the City of Coral Gables was really helpful in taking a look at the draft. Also Rick Longebert from Raleigh, and Heather Bollock and Chris Davis with the City of Charlotte. Really, really appreciate their insights because like I said, they've already gone through a lot of this and made decisions and then sometimes, you know, questioned those decisions and changed how they approached it. So really, really appreciate their insights and taking a look at this. So I am going to just kind of go through and introduce the 6 categories that we're proposing and then have some questions to go through with the group to see if we're on point with this or where we can go to improve. So if you would go to the next slide, Reed. So the first section is all about foundations and policy, planning and governance. So the first category of questions is looking at a strategic alignment and just trying to assess where your municipality is in terms of already having plans on the books that would help to leverage the decision to electrify either a pilot and starting small or continuing to electrify if you've already started. And then also that would include governance and decision making and looking at just how your fleet is structured and who the decision makers are for the fleet. And then also looking at operational flexibility and, you know, have you considered instead of just purchasing, leasing or also pooling or shared use models. So that's the first section that we've identified. The second one is looking at planning and feasibility. So taking a look at leadership and stakeholder engagement and just being able to assess how much support you have for it and where that support lies within your municipality. Also looking at utility coordination and how supportive your utility is for this and what resources they have. And then taking a look at your fleet and doing that just peripheral first assessment of where the fleet's at and how much in partnership your fleet director is with sustainability staff. So that's the second section that we've carved out, planning and feasibility. And then the third section is kind of the meat and potatoes. So it's looking at doing that analysis of the, you know, use case for the vehicles, understanding where your fleet domicile, where they stay overnight, considering how long those vehicles are at different where they're dwelling, and then also considering range and battery size and being able to match that up. And then if you go to the next slide, it keeps going. So this is the biggest chunk of the decision tree, but also then looking at what models would be a match, and then doing some assessment on charging, and then some internal investigation on municipal capacity and like what your city's ability is for charging. And then the fourth section is design and procurement. So looking at actually taking the steps, purchasing, looking at funding, looking at creating the installation plan and the site plan, and all of the other coordination that would need to happen throughout the different departments within the city. And then the fifth section is about operation and management. So looking at ongoing daily operations and management and making sure that those questions have been thought through and planned for. And then the final section is on evaluation and growth. So if if this is a pilot, being able to capture data so that you can grow it in the future or be able to analyze and be able to provide data points that would help justify the decision to continue. So that's kind of the overview of the different categories. So I think what I'd like to do now, Kyle, is if you could pull up the first question. So what we're wanting some feedback on is if we created a resource like this to help identify a roadmap for fleet electrification, like would you use a resource like this? So if you could answer that first question. And then the second question is, has your municipality done a baseline analysis of your fleet to identify which vehicles would be suitable for replacement? So if you guys could take some time to answer those questions, give you some time to do that right now. And then Kyle is going to tell us when we've got critical mass here. All right. Looks like that's probably enough time for everybody that can answer that's not on a phone or to that somebody that, folks that are at their computer be able to answer. So I would like to open it up then. If you answered no, then, or I'm sorry, if you answered yes, if you could come off mute, if anybody would like to provide some feedback on if you think that this would be something useful, or also looking at this outline, if you could talk through or share like where you're stuck or where you need the most help, or where you think would be where we should be focusing in a little bit more. So let me.
Hey, Dory, in terms of what this ends up looking like for this fleet decision tree, when we look at battery recycling or second use life, would you be providing us with some recommendations on how to do that or like what that would look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea is to provide resources for each of the questions that we've got here. And so, yeah, I mean, ideally that would be, and it would continue to grow, right? So it's not like there may be, a resource today, but then we intend to continue adding to this to make it more useful.
I think just the list of questions alone are very useful, and I know that we've done several of them in Holly Springs, but I think having some loaded reference material on what KPIs are going to be most useful for us to track the return on investment, and then what KPIs we should look at for evaluating effectiveness, and then also like the battery recycling and second use life. That's stuff that we're not really thinking about. However, we should be. and having some of that information, or at least some question like this to prompt the discussion, is valuable.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Can I ask the question? Has anybody done the fleet analysis that could look at and think through like what's missing? Or if folks have not done a fleet analysis, maybe come off mute and explain why that's been a hang up or why it hasn't happened?
So I'll speak to Holly Springs really quick. We did do the dashboard for rapid vehicle electrification, the drive tool that
Okay.
Alice Public Policy had put together with the Electrification Coalition. And we hadn't done it because I was a little scared initially, where it's like, oh, I got to get all these data points. But once I like sat down and like looked at it, it's like, oh, it's only like 4 points. And, you know, we have all of that stuff because we've got telematics. So it ended up being really easy. And once we dug into it even further, it made it a lot more interesting to add in our own kind of like customizations for like what fleet vehicles we would want to select over some of the pre-populated vehicle models and stuff like that. So it was very helpful, and it's kind of changed a lot of the conversations that we're having about fleet replacements.
Great. And so it builds a spreadsheet for you, right? It is part of that resource. Was there anything that you added to it that helped with decisions?
We wanted to look at like it includes depreciation, but we also consider like what the vehicle sale would be once we're done with it, because we'll sell it as surplus. And so that was something that we're trying to consider. And then we customized it with our own like utility pricing for electricity, with our own fuel prices that we've been paying, with the contract prices that we would purchase vehicles with, and then what our fleet manager would prefer to purchase. Like, he's a Ford guy. He that's what he wants to buy. So when some of the like the Kias and the BMWs popped up, we're like, he's not going to go for those. So we changed some of that.
Good deal. Thank you, Greg.
Hello, it's Chris Davis. I'm calling in on the phone while driving, so I'll stay off camera. But one thing that I've been thinking about with our electric vehicles is once they're here, the replacement methodology. And so we've traditionally used age and maintenance costs and repair costs, things of that nature. But I'm talking with a company about testing the EV battery health, where you get a battery health scorecard and a points rating. And I think we're just going to need to reevaluate how we evaluate vehicles, electric vehicles, for replacement, and have that as part of the roadmap as well, and think about useful life. And then, of course, that goes into the total cost of ownership calculations. And if battery's showing good health, and the cars or truck's still in good shape, I'm really wondering if EVs won't have a much longer lifespan and, make them more affordable. Time will tell, but that's one thing I'm learning more about. So I just wanted to share that with the group.
Thank you, Chris. That's a great point. There was just a study release showing that they are living much longer lives than had originally been anticipated.
So one other thing to add to what Chris said, with the drive tool, you can change the length of time that you expect the vehicle to be in service. And, as we know, the savings from maintenance, after you're like 5 are significantly less on your EV versus your ICE vehicle. So one of the things that we played with is if we could hold on to vehicles, I think right now we look at 7 years. If we could hold on to the vehicles until 9 years, what would that savings be like? So we would change essentially some of the fleet policy, and then, the savings was like 20% more or 30% more by, keeping the vehicle in service longer. Now, granted, like, we're not having to buy the vehicle and turn it over that much, so there's obvious savings there, but just holding on to it from the maintenance perspective made it so much more attractive that, I think that's something that we need to consider and how long we're going to hold on to the vehicles too.
That's a great point. All right. Well, it looks like we've got some data points that we can take back. So thank you guys for having this conversation with us. I'm going to hand it over to Caitlin to kind of close us out. Thank you guys so much for your participation today.
Thanks, Dory. Yeah, thanks everyone, both speakers and participants, for joining us today. I think this was a really great discussion, and I definitely learned a lot, and excited to continue these conversations on future Electrify the South collaborative calls. Speaking of which, I think the only announcements I have, I'll reiterate our next couple of meetings in case any of you weren't able to join us at the top of the call. We'll be having an in-person event in Jacksonville, Florida on Wednesday, February 4th. That's for local governments who are working in the state of Florida on these issues. So y'all will receive a little bit more specific information from the collaborative about that event soon. But for everybody else, we look forward to seeing you virtually on January 29th at 10 a.m. for our next virtual ATS event. And thanks all for joining us today. Dory, anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
I think you nailed it.
Great.
Thank you guys so much. Have a great week.
Thanks, everybody.